Oh, hello. I didn't see you there. Welcome once again to another edition of Masterpiece Theater. Those albums that have gotten critical acclaim from across the landscape of progressive rock. Those albums that I feel are the hidden gems within the landscape, or those albums that I just have something to add. And here we find ourselves within the middle of the three. This album is one of those hidden gems that many love but few know about. So let's dive into this hidden gem. On a Dark and Stormy Night by Shadow Circus. So Shadow Circus is a North American progressive rock band. These guys got a really big start in, say, the later 2000s with their first album of Welcome to the Freak Room. They then followed it up 3 years later with Whispers and Screams, but it is the third and final album that these guys have released of On a Dark and Stormy Night that was released 3 years after that, which is a complete concept album all based on the beautiful novel of A Wrinkle in Time. Now, A Wrinkle in Time is one of my all-time favorite novels. I didn't read it as a kid, I actually read it as I was an adult, and I'm glad that I waited because if I tried to read this guy when I was a kid, I would not have understood the language at all. I'm not going to get too far into the actual book or the novelization of the story, but what I am going to do is I'm going to talk about how it was adapted into a musical stylings. Many progressive rock artists, and a lot of artists overall, adapt books to music, and sometimes it works very beautifully, and other times it doesn't. Now, luckily, we do have it working wonderfully here, and I'll explain kind of why. The first is when you're adapting a novel into a musical output, there's a lot of things you can do wrong, and the first and most dire thing is you can miss the spirit of the book. And I feel like this is what has happened with a lot of novel adaptations into music. It would have been very, very easy for the band just to kind of play kind of mediocre music to help sell their album, but here we have a very good understanding of the music that needs to be provided for such a complex story as A Wrinkle in Time. And I don't mean complex in the terms that the plot is hard to follow, I mean complex as in emotionally complex. Each of the characters are being pulled and pushed in different ways. I mean, just the character of Charles Wallace alone on here is a fantastic representation. I mean, the battle at the end is just fantastic, and I feel I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's just go right into the album itself and really explore here. So first off, we have the Overture. I love a good overture, and the overture kind of presents each of the musical themes that will be presented within the album. And so it had been very, very easy just to stop here and just kind of thrown up my arms and said, yep, masterpiece, that's all we need to listen to. But luckily, it's how these sounds are permeating throughout the rest of the album, when they pick up certain pieces, when they leave certain pieces off, and how they play and develop each one. A lot of these do have kind of a straight up callback to the overture, but I like that a lot of these themes are introduced so that when it comes back a second time around, or sometimes even a third time around, we're ready for it and we know how they are going to build from it. So a great way to open up the album. I also love that the album is opened up with thunder, lightning, as well as the sound of rain, because that's how the book is opened up. I mean, the album itself is called On a Dark and Stormy Night, and that is how the book itself is opened. Like, that is the first line of the novel. Now, the second song of Daddy's Gone. This is where we have that emotional tie to the album, as well as within the book. The whole book is a search for their father, and where the father has been taken. So when they say that Daddy's gone, the emotional context is realized there. That emotional grief that we're feeling from the kids is palpable, like it is tangible on that particular track. And I love the passion within the lead singer here. He does a fantastic job of really bringing it to fruition. And much like a lot of really great prog albums, we'll be revisiting that because something as beautiful as this shouldn't be left alone. When we come into the third song of Who's It, What's It, and Which, this is just one of the very funky tracks on this album, and I love how fun and happy it is. This is when we meet those three very strange beings, those interdimensional beings that kind of lead the children into their adventure. This is where I would recommend this album for anybody that's loving more of a fun metal prog that would have been found from, say, a Dream Theater or a Haken, or even like the Native Construct. Like when people were recommending me their first album of The Quiet World, I was saying, this is really good, like I fully attached to it, but have you guys heard of A Dark and Stormy Night? Now the fourth song, kind of the midpoint on this, that is Make Way for the Big Show. I love the music that is found within it. I love the groove, I love the musical playing styles, everybody is definitely at top notch. And I love where it goes from that Make Way for the Big Show Tonight, and then it goes into that next part. I feel like the transition there was very masterfully done.
Make way for the big show tonight.
Now, the fifth song, starting us off within the second half of this, is Tesseract, and this particular piece just blew me away. Like, this is a purely instrumental track, and it's one of the more heavy-hitting one, and I love the sounds that are being utilized within the synthesizer. That is just fantastic, and I feel like it really gave an amazing musical representation of what a tesseract is. Now within the sixth track of Uriel, this is where we're recounting a lot of the themes within the Overture, but I also like the drive of this particular track. Again, the lead singer is fantastic, and it's that going from the transitions from, say, the chorus to the verse to the bridge, I feel like the band really knows what they're doing within that, because each one builds off the other so that there's no real low point. It all comes up to fruition, and Uriel I can vividly picture. It is a fantastic image that I get each time I listen to it.
Take me with you, my Uriel. Keep me warm within your heart.
Now the seventh track of Camazaz, this really gave me a very visual essence of that place that the children go to, where there's only very structured time, like now is the time for play, now is the time for work, and I love the narrative that we find on here. That is a great translation from the printed word, because everything on this song is very, very structured. Like the bass and the drumming on this is so on point. Like, whereas the other tracks, there was a lot of wiggle room and there was a lot of interplay. This one is just straight up, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, and you have to follow suit. Painted perfectly with how everything is structured within the environment that we have. The eighth track of Uriel, this is another purely instrumental piece, and unlike the Tesseract, this one is a 360. Like, this one is just very, very somber, very minimalistic. It's just a synthesizer, maybe a little bit of vocalizations, and a guitar. And I love that it gives a little bit of a breather after what we have been through up until this point. And so that really leads us within my favorite track, the ninth track of The Battle for Charles Wallace. This one, right off the get-go, just hits you hard. It starts off with a very eerie synthesizer noise of all these strings that aren't quite connecting very well, and then once it comes to a crescendo, we bam it into that really meaty hook, and you can feel the battle that's going on within Charles Wallace. As those strings are rising within the novel, that's where you can like see the dark energy taking a hold of Charles Wallace, and so that sound is exactly what I thought of when I was reading this particular passage. And when we finally have a resolution of that, I love how optimistic everything is. I love how it goes from like this uncertain battle into, say, this kind of a triumphant win after all of this has permeated. And then when we finally have that kind of celebration, we are reunited with the father figure again, and that is bled into the outro, where we finally have that, now that we've met and now that I've got you, I'm never going to leave you again. And that is we revisit that same guitar work that we had from Daddy's Gone, but this time it kind of plays a Supper's Ready, where it's revisited, slowed down, and much more impactful. And that play out, that guitar work, it always leaves me breathless.
Don't you ever leave me. Don't you ever leave me ever again.
And so overall, I love this album, and it's one of my favorites. I love how optimistic and happy it is, even with some of those more dramatic and heavy tones. I feel like a lot of metal nowadays are just very, very dark and very brooding, and so whenever a band comes along that utilizes the metal technique but in a more of a optimistic or positive light, I gravitate to it automatically. So I love that it's so prominent on this album, even though it's kind of standing on the shoulders of a giant such as the Wrinkle in Time series. I love that they play a very beautiful tribute to it as well, and I love that they captured the essence of the novel, because in the end, it's a personal story, and it's the emotion that is built around it, and so that is what I feel has definitely been captured. And so that's why I have to say On a Dark and Stormy Night is an absolute masterpiece.
We're not worthy! We're not worthy!
So, what did you guys think of this incredible album? Have you had a listen? If not, definitely check it out. It's on Spotify. Have a listen, and once you have, let me know what you thought of it. If you have listened to it, of course, let me know what you thought about it by commenting down below. Thank you guys, as always, so much for watching. You guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.